Hello everyone and welcome back to the Stormblood Dungeon Lore series. In these videos I'll do my best to explain the lore behind each dungeon of Final Fantasy XIV and go over some things about them that you might not know. Today's dungeon is the hard mode version of St. Mocianne's Arboretum. As we've come to expect by now, the Sharlayans that once resided in the Dravanian hinterlands left behind many unknown experiments, both intriguing and dangerous in equal measure. This has led no few inquisitive minds to seek out treasures hidden deep within the great structures housing some of these lost works. With our excursion into the Great Gubal Library, we discovered their enormous repository of knowledge, and the dangers that hide within the tomes there, additionally retrieving a tome to be put to use in the Thaumaturge's Guild. At St. Mocianne's Arboretum, we found its inhabitants overgrown and out of control due to the abandoning of the structure, discovering many beasts, plants and insects alike, each in their own territories and extremely aggressive. The group at the time, however, managed to push through and retrieve what appeared to be a box of seeds for Sawney and Midnight Dew, which turned out to be useful plants for fast-growing and easily sustainable produce for the peoples of Idleshire. For a time after this, the Arboretum stood more silently with its inhabitants placated thanks to the Warrior of Light, but in Rauga's reach they happened to bump into Sawney once more, who appears to be on the lookout for us. Having travelled far from Idleshire after hearing of our assistance with the resistance, he cuts to the chase and informs us of trouble brewing at the Arboretum once again. He requests that we take a break from chasing the Garleans and accompany him to outside the entrance to the place in the Dravanian hinterlands. We meet with Sawney just as Midnight Dew also arrives with a peculiar mud-covered corpuscle in tow. She tells us the reason for seeking us out is due to the creature, and Sawney explains that as it emerged from the Arboretum covered in filth, he couldn't help but notice how energetic and agitated it was. Midnight Dew asked Edgith, the resident botanist in Idleshire, to look at the creature and determined the coating mud as the cause for its unusual behaviour. Due to this, they believe that the mud could have properties beneficial for the crops in the plots in Idleshire and thought to ask us for assistance. Predictably, this is because the other creatures of the Arboretum seem to also be covered in the same mud, causing them to go haywire and become more aggressive than ever before. Although they want to send Edgith to look further into the mud, they can't be sure of her safety with the flora running amok, and so request we take a second trip into the place to calm them, and hopefully disperse the worst part of the energizing grime from within. Arrive just inside the doorway obscured by branches, similar to our first visit, and we immediately see a drastic change in the surrounding plants. Possibly thanks to the mud flowing through the Arboretum, the bushes and trees nearby appear withered and discoloured, and we even see a lone husk of a morble at the side of the path. We continue on and begin fighting the withered but no less dangerous creatures inhabiting the place, along with the Belladonnas and the Sanchinis at the Arpers, and although the latter are usually elemental creatures, these two seem to be caked in the mud spreading throughout the place, causing them to be highly resistant to attacks due to the natural armour. After this we carry on through Sylvology and defeat another group of the plants, eventually reaching the familiar pond in Limnology, although this time we can see the effects of the mud having dirtied the water from its usual clear blue. As we head across the lily pads, the corpuscle that live within the waters burst forth, although these, like the one accompanying Midnight Dew, also appear to be covered in the mud. Once the group falls, the next morble husk blocking the way crumbles, and we can proceed to Zymology, where a large seedkin known as the Knoldchew awaits. This beast seems to thrive in the more harsh conditions of the Arboretum, attacking the group as we enter its domain. The Knoldchew uses a toxic gas to attack the group, with odious air expelling some from its huge mouth. After a time, it spits a liquid toxin at a party member and uses Fault Warren to slam onto the group, around which time another smaller seedkin, attracted by the odour and the noise, appears in the arena. The Knoldchew then takes its chance and leaps onto the plant, devouring it and immediately belching forth a constant stream of the horrible gas at the party. Following this, it resumes its regular poisonous attacks, and the party eventually manages to cut it down, allowing us to proceed into the trunk of the huge central tree. As we fall, we can see that this mighty tree at least has sustained itself without withering, but as we emerge from the opening we find ourselves surrounded by the muddy waters yet again. We begin encountering more plant life, with the mud-covered upper still roaming this area as well as the Biloko, staff-wielding wooden golems. These creatures attempt to use roly-poly to transform its victims into Korpika, and while this renders the nearby creatures much less dangerous, it can also affect the group and leave them a sitting duck until the transformation wears off, or if they happen to be hit by a second roly-poly. Across the branches brushing the water's surface, we find several leeches from the nearby waters, as well as the withered Kaluks, entish creatures that swipe heavily around themselves. After defeating it, the nearby debris collapses and allows us to proceed. We find another pair of Kaluk here along with more leeches and a final Biloko before the path clears and we find our way to the soil bed, where a strange floating being known as Lahamu awaits. This creature's name is a possible reference to Lahamu, a deity from ancient Mesopotamia, one who with her brother Lamu was said to represent silt and lodo, a word for slippery liquid mud. Considering Lakamu's abilities, this seems reasonably accurate, as the spirit unleashes several earth-based magical attacks at the group. As we engage her, she calls forth thorns to fill the edge of the room. She immediately calls a powerful stone spell upon the tanking party member, and follows up with an earth-moving landslip. Turning the solid ground to slippery mud underneath us, Lakamu pushes the group to one side, forcing them to avoid the golems along the edge slamming down in front of them. After dodging the golem, she prepares a huge earthquake, initially raising the earth around her which then expands outwards, damaging any caught in the shockwave. Lastly, the spirit unleashes a powerful earth-shaking slam upon two party members, forcing them to separate as to not increase the ferocity of the blast. After reverting from Lakamu's empty gaze, as well as slipping past more of the slamming golems, the party fells the spirit, and we can proceed onwards to environmental control, a yet untapped area of the Arboretum. This more open stretch of the facility seems to have been designed with water-based creatures in mind, as we soon run into the slugs and Bipheraceras roaming the deserted pathway. As we descend to face more of the creatures, we can see many of the Sharlayan shell motifs around the walls and the gates nearby. It's also likely that these lower areas are regularly brimmed with water, or at least partially filled with water, with many nearby puddles and splotches of mud. As we tackle the foes here, the Matar with them seems oddly resistant to damage, similar to the Apar from before, again likely due to the thick coating of mud upon its shell and body. After felling it, the gate opens and we find several of the muddy Korpakurs, along with another Apar. But this time we find that the nearby water conduit functions properly, and upon activation, a heavy flow of water spills from a nearby pipe. Pulling the creatures underneath the deluge, we can wash away the thick mud coating them, and in turn get rid of the extra layer of defense brought by it. The following section has more muddy matters, and so we again use the nearby conduit to clean them, and eventually reach another staircase leading back up to the higher platform. We head along a final corridor to Kingsloan, where the perpetrator behind the muddy mess lies in wait. We reach a latticed platform surrounded by more of the muddy waters, and as we approach, an odd creature completely made of the magical mud bursts from the depths, quivering and wailing as it prepares to fight. Although this seems to be a unique creature at first glance, a closer look at the familiar rounded head and large mouth indicates that this creature too is a mud-drenched Korpika gone berserk thanks to the overload of the magical mess. It begins with a great swing of its arms at the tanking party member, heavily colliding with the muddy swipe. After this, the waters below begin to churn and froth, threatening to surge upon the group. To avoid this, they must use the sections of the platform that is solid ground and away from the lattice sections, allowing the water to burst around but not on top of them. The Tokapchi then attempts to drench the party in the mud by targeting them, and while the mud itself is not so dangerous, covering too much of one of the safer platforms will leave it completely coated in the sticky mud. Following this, the creature calls forth a smaller mud slime, appearing nearby on the platform. Although again it seems innocuous, the mud slime has an unusually high affinity for absorbing the nearby mud, meaning coming into contact with any of the covered platforms would increase its size. After another quagmire on the group, the slime begins to burst and damages the party. However, if the slime is too big from absorbing the mud, its explosion can be devastating. To prevent the slime from getting more mud from the next churning waters, the party can hit it to have it slide onto a platform to also avoid the blast. When injured, a handful more muddy Korpakurs burst from the water to defend their larger fellow, and as they do so, the Tokapchi calls forth the second mud slime. After the next wave of water, the creature purposefully targets the slime with a feculent flood of the mud, attempting to enlarge it and cause yet more damage. After enduring the next explosion from the slime and dodging the ever-bubbling waters, we managed to fell the Tokapchi, clearing the mud from the pipeline and allowing the clean water to flow and filter through the Arboretum once again. We regroup with Sawney just outside the entrance once more, and await Midnight Dew and Edgeth, who arrive shortly after. The latter thanks us for helping to discover the secret of the mysterious mud, and explains that upon some research materials was listed a concoction to accelerate the decomposition of plant matter to compost. The mud seemed to be a key aspect within the ingredients for the formula. Edgeth explains, as we encountered, that the mud seems to agitate and upset the seedkin, causing them to act as we saw them, aggressive and dangerous over any interlopers. Sawney notes the formula may be useful on the plants that don't threaten to kill the cultivator, and Edgeth, after wondering why the Sharlayans didn't keep the formula safer, determines it of great use for the plots and soil in Dravania. She also demonstrates her finding too of being able to wash the mud off the afflicted seedkin with some nearby water, allowing the Corpicure friend to regain its more natural green form. Sawney and the Warrior of Light, however, think the creature is still somewhat of a nuisance, but Midnight Dew believes that the positives were worth it, considering the new powerful formula for growing plants they now have access to for Idleshire. She then promises to let the locals know who to thank, once they start feasting on the great vegetables soon to be thriving within the Green Grub farms. And that's the end of the story and lore of the hard-mode version of St. Mocianne's Arboretum. Another trip into the plant-filled structure, this time finding its inhabitants angry and dried out from a muddy misbehaviour. Thanks to the Warrior of Light's efforts, however, Idleshire can now look forward to even more thriving crops to help return the settlement to its former glory. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more Final Fantasy XIV, and I'll see you next time for the Gimlet Dark.